put your hands together for Nir.
So much. Thank you. It is great to be here because while I have given talks for Amplitude before, this is my first time giving a talk for Amplitude in my new hometown in New York City. I'm so glad to be here with you as a resident. So today, what we want to dive into is this psychology behind how habits are formed. So we've all seen how these products can have such a profound impact on our day-to-day lives. And if we want to learn a new skill, if we want to get really good at something, we want to look at the people who do that skill better than we do, right? If you want to be an amazing swimmer, maybe you want to call Michael Phelps. If you want to be a fantastic investor, maybe you learn from Warren Buffett. If you want to be a world-class actor, maybe you call Keanu Reeves. Are you guys awake? Okay, just want to make sure you're awake. Okay. You guys get my point. If we want to be world-class at building the kind of products that keep people coming back, that build for engagement and habits and retention, what we want to do is to look for patterns that are endemic to some of the most habit-forming products on Earth, right? Some of the usual suspects like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and WhatsApp in the enterprise space, companies like Slack, for example. What is it about these companies? What is it about the user experience of these companies' products that makes them so habit-forming? So what we're going to do today is to try and explore these patterns so that we can adopt some of those techniques to build habits for our own product or service. Now, to be very clear, this talk is not meant to teach you how to build products for Facebook or for Google. I don't really care about those companies. They already know these techniques. My goal, the reason I do what I do, is to help everyone else use the same exact techniques to help people build the kind of habits that improve their lives, that help them live happier, healthier, more productive lives if they would only use your product. So that's what I'm here to help you do today. There are so many products that I see every single day that would benefit users tremendously if they would only use it. And for lack of good product design, they're not used. So that's what we want to do today, is to understand what is it about these products that makes them so habit-forming. And to set the stage, let's get all on the same page around the definition of a habit. A habit is simply the impulse to do a behavior with little or no conscious thought. It's about half of what you do every single day, day in and day out, is done purely out of habit. These behaviors done with little or no conscious thought. And we can actually use these habits to improve people's lives. And so that's what we want to work on today, is how do we build these products with what I call a hook embedded into the product experience. A hook is an experience designed to connect the user's problem with your product with enough frequency to form a habit. Let me say that again. A hook is an experience designed to connect your product with the user's problem with enough frequency to form a habit. And it's through successive cycles through these hooks, these 4 stages of a trigger, an action, a reward, and an investment, that our preferences are formed, that our tastes are shaped, and that these habits take hold. So I want to give you a very, very brief overview because you've all received a copy of the book, which has exercises and a lot more information, a lot more research about what went into this hook model. But I want to give you kind of just a very quick 30,000-foot overview of the hook model, and then we want to open it up to some questions, okay? So let's start off with triggers. Triggers are always the first step to every hook. Now, there are 2 types of triggers. We have external triggers, and we have internal triggers. External triggers you'll be very familiar with. We as product designers, we know these external triggers because we see them. This is our craft. We work with these every single day. An external trigger is something in your environment that tells you what to do next. Click here, buy now, play this, a friend through word of mouth, all are examples of external triggers. But what turns out to be actually more important than these external triggers for creating these long-term habits is creating an association with what's called an internal trigger. Internal triggers are things that prompt action, but where the information for what to do next is stored as a memory or an association inside the user's brain. So what we do when we're in a particular place, a certain situation, partaking in a certain routine, or most frequently when we experience certain emotions, prompts us to action, tells us what to do next. Now, the most frequently occurring internal triggers are these emotions, but not just any emotion. They are specifically negative emotions. Negative emotions. What we do when we're feeling lonesome or tense or dissatisfied or bored or lonely, what we do when we experience these internal triggers prompts us to action. Listen, there is only one reason and one reason only that you use any product or service. And that reason is to modulate our mood, to make us feel something different. There was a study a few years ago that found that people suffering from clinical depression check email more. I just saw 3 people put away their phones. What's going on there? Why did this study find this? What's going on here? What this study found is that people suffering from depression experience what psychologists call negative valence states. They feel down more often than the rest of the population. And what are they doing to boost their mood, to be taken out of their negative valence states? They're checking their devices, they're going online, they're looking at email more often than the rest of the population. Now, if we're honest with ourselves, we all do this, right? We all do this. What website or app do we check when we're feeling lonely? Where do we go? Go on Facebook, right? Or maybe Tinder, also true. What do we do when we're feeling unsure about something? Before we scan our brains to see if we know the answer, we Google it. And what about when we're feeling bored? You know, it's between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon and we have that big project we don't feel like working on right now. We go to YouTube, we check stock prices, we look at sports scores, we check Reddit. Right? All of these products and services cater to this painful internal trigger of boredom. We don't like that sensation, and we find relief with these products found in our pockets. So, how do we use this for good? How do we help people build healthy habits using what we know about internal triggers? Well, it comes down to fundamentally knowing what is your user's itch. I can't tell you how many product teams I work with, and they come to me and they show me all the whiz-bang technological features that their product can do. But when I ask them, okay, but what's the itch? What's the internal trigger? What's the real customer need that occurs with sufficient frequency to build a habit around? They can't tell me. So they're basically hoping that they'll get lucky. So if you're building a habit-forming product, you have got to be able to articulate what is that frequently occurring internal trigger. That is a critical first step. The next thing we want to do is to build for the action. The action phase of the hook is defined as the simplest thing a user can do to get relief from that psychological discomfort, from that loneliness, boredom, stress, anxiety, whatever it might be. Remember, the beauty of what we do for a living, right? We don't create these internal triggers, we satiate them. The beauty of what we as product managers do is that we get to solve people's pain points. And we want to do that as quickly and simply as possible to satiate whatever problem they've come to our product to address. Now, let me show you some examples of the action phase of a few habit-forming products, and I want you to see just how simple these actions are. Something as simple as a scroll on Pinterest, or a quick search on Google, or what could be simpler than pushing the play button on YouTube. These incredibly simple behaviors done in anticipation of an immediate reward. Now, there's actually a formula to help us predict the likelihood of these singular behaviors. It comes to us from a researcher at Stanford by the name of B.J. Fogg, who tells us that for any human behavior B, we need 3 things at the same time. For any behavior to occur, we need sufficient motivation, we need sufficient ability. Ability is how easy or difficult something is to do. And finally, we need that trigger. We just talked all about triggers. So let's talk about the M and the A in B equals MAT. The M stands for motivation. This is the energy to do a particular behavior, how much we want to do a particular action. Now, psychologists have struggled to define the nature of motivation for decades, but Fogg tells us that motivation is basically a factor of these 6 things, that all of us as human beings, we seek pleasure, we avoid pain. We seek hope, we avoid fear. We seek social acceptance, and we avoid social rejection. So we can use these 6 levers. This is what you see in ad copy, on videos, on testimonials. We're fundamentally using these 6 levers of motivation to make a behavior more likely to occur. There's a lot more in the book about motivation, but for the sake of time, I want to go to the next part of B equals MAT. The A stands for ability. Ability is the capacity to do a particular behavior, how easy or difficult something is to do. Psychologists have known for decades that the easier something is to do, the more likely people are to do it. So here again, we have these 6 key levers that we can pull on to make a behavior more likely to occur, based on how much time something takes, how much money something costs, how much physical effort is required. Brain cycles, this is a big one when it comes to the products that we use, technology products that we use. The harder something is to understand, the less likely the behavior is to occur. Social deviance says that we become more likely to do something when we see other people like us doing it. And finally, non-routine says that we become more likely to do something simply for the fact that we have done it before in the past. And this is why habits are so important. You see, habits have this repeater effect. The more I do something, the easier it becomes, and the more likely I am to do it in the future. What's that called? It's called practice, right? The more I do it, the easier it gets, the more likely I am again to do it in the future. So we can actually plot out these 3 basic elements of motivation, ability, and triggers on this graph. And we can ask ourselves, if you are building a product or service, and for whatever reason, people aren't doing the thing you want them to do, there are only 3 potential reasons. Either they lack motivation, right? They lack motivation, in which case they don't cross the blue line. They lack ability, in which case they don't cross the blue line, or the trigger isn't present. So for any behavior to occur, your behavior, your significant other's behavior, your kid's behavior, your customer or user's behavior, you always have to have sufficient motivation and sufficient ability, and the trigger must be present every single time. Let's make this concrete. I want you to think of the last time that a telephone rang in your life, and you did not pick up the phone. Somebody give me a reason. Why did you not pick up the phone? What's the reason? Unknown number, perfect. So you look at your phone, you heard it ring, right? The trigger was present. The phone was right there next to you. You had plenty of ability, but you lacked motivation. You didn't cross that red threshold, so the trigger could not succeed. What's another reason why you didn't pick up the call? What's that? What does avoidance mean? Avoiding somebody you don't want to talk to? Okay, that would be like your mother-in-law or telemarketer or something. That would be low motivation again. What's a reason that has to do with ability or a trigger why you didn't pick up the call? You're in the shower, perfect. You're taking a shower, you hear the phone ring, the trigger is present, right? You have plenty of motivation. Oh my God, I really need to pick up that call, but it's too difficult, it's too hard to go, rinse off, get out of the shower, and go pick up the call. You lacked ability. This zone up here, high motivation, low ability, this zone over here is called frustration. This is most likely the biggest problem with your product. 9 times out of 10, when I work with a company, they tell me, we just need to motivate the user. We need to tell them how great our product is. And that's almost never the solution. 9 times out of 10, the solution is to make the product easier to use, to increase ability, not increase motivation. What's one more reason that has to do with the trigger why you may not pick up a call? You didn't hear it, exactly. The phone was on silent. This happens to me all the damn time, right? I really wanted to pick up that call, high motivation. The phone was right there next to me, but no trigger was present, right? Again and again, when I work with product teams, I see these amazingly designed pages, but there's no clear trigger on every page, every behavior that you want to create for your users. There has to be all 3, motivation, ability, and a trigger for every click, for every action. Okay, let's move on to the 3rd step of the hook, the reward phase. The reward phase is where the user's itch is scratched, where they get what they came for. But to talk about rewards, we have to talk about the brain. And in particular, an area of the brain called the nucleus accumbens, which was first studied back in the 1950s by 2 Canadian researchers. They did these amazing experiments where they took an electrical wire and they connected it to the brain of lab animals inside their nucleus accumbens. Then they allowed these lab animals to self-stimulate. They could push on a little lever which would send an electrical current to their nucleus accumbens. What they discovered was that these lab animals wanted to do nothing but activate their nucleus accumbens again and again and again. In later experiments done on people, when people were given a little button to press on, and every time they would press on this button, they would receive an electrical jolt to their nucleus accumbens, they observed similar results. Some of the people in the studies had to have the machines forcibly removed from them to get them to stop activating their nucleus accumbens. Well, it turns out we don't need electrodes in people's brains to activate their nucleus accumbens. Your nucleus accumbens is activated every single day with things like luxury goods, sex, certain chemicals, junk food, and of course, in the center, our technology. All of these things activate the very same part of the brain, the nucleus accumbens. Now, for decades, the psychology community believed that the purpose of the nucleus accumbens was to stimulate pleasure, right? Why else would lab animals and later people incessantly activate this part of the brain if it wasn't because it felt good, right? Not exactly. It turns out what we now know that Olds and Milner never did is that the nucleus accumbens does not stimulate pleasure per se, but instead activates what we call the stress of desire, this wanting, this craving reflex. Because what we now know through these fMRI studies is that the nucleus accumbens becomes most active in anticipation of the reward. But when we actually get the thing we want, the thing that's finally going to make us happy, and then we're going to feel good, that's when the nucleus accumbens becomes less active. So the way the brain gets us to act is by creating this itch that we seek to scratch. This desire, this desire to scratch this itch of wanting. And there is a way that I can teach you to supercharge this anticipatory response. Does anybody here want to know how to manufacture desire? Is anybody curious? I'm doing it to you right now. So when I asked you a question, and I took this long pause, and I stopped talking for a minute or two, or a few seconds actually, some of you perked up. Why did he stop talking? What's the answer? What's going to happen next? And it turns out that this bit of uncertainty, this bit of mystery, this bit of the unknown is in all sorts of products that we find most engaging and most habit-forming. It's called a variable reward. Now, variable rewards first came from the studies of B.F. Skinner, the father of operant conditioning. He took these pigeons, he put them in a little box, and he gave them a disc to peck at. And every time they pecked at the disc, they would receive a little food pellet, a little reward. And so very quickly, Skinner could train these pigeons to peck at the disc whenever they were hungry. Great, that's called operant conditioning. But then one day, Skinner actually started to run out of these food pellets. He didn't have enough. And so he started giving out the food pellets every once in a while. So sometimes the pigeon would peck at the disc, no food pellet would come out. But the next time they would peck at the disc, they would receive a reward. And what Skinner observed is that the rate of response, the number of times that these pigeons pecked at the disc, increased when the reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement. Why does this happen? Because variability spikes activity in the nucleus accumbens, creating this desirous response, this wanting reflex. And so in all sorts of products that we find most engaging, most habit-forming, not just online, but also offline, you will find one or more of these three types of variable rewards. Rewards of the tribe, rewards of the hunt, and rewards of the self. Let me illustrate these for you real quick. Rewards of the tribe are things that feel good, that have this element of variability, and come from other people. The search for empathetic joy, feeling good because someone else feels good, partnership, cooperation, competition, all of these things are examples of rewards of the tribe, things that feel good, come from other people, and have this element of mystery and uncertainty. Best example, of course, is social media, right? When you open up the Facebook app or Instagram app, you never quite know what you're going to see there, right? What do the comments say? How many people, what are people posting? How many likes does something get? High degree of variability associated with social media. The next type of variable reward is rewards of the hunt. Rewards of the hunt are all about the primal search for resources and other material possessions, and they stem from our search for these resources. So when many people think about variable rewards, They think about slot machines, where the variable reward is what you might win when you play one of these games of chance. But we see the exact same psychology at work online. Think about Twitter or LinkedIn or anything with a feed today. Have you noticed, why does everything today seem to have a feed? What is it about the feed? Well, if you take Twitter or LinkedIn, for example, you open up the app, and maybe that first tweet's not that interesting, a second tweet's not that interesting, but maybe the third or fourth tweet is interesting. And what do I have to do to keep seeing more interesting content? What do I have to do? Scroll. So that scrolling and scrolling use the exact same psychology as pulling on a slot machine, searching and searching for that next variable reward. Now, the last type of variable reward is rewards of the self. The search for mastery, completion, competency, and control. These are things that feel good, that have this element of variability, but aren't about the search for material possessions or social rewards. These are things that feel good in and of themselves. Best example online is gameplay. If you think about when people play Angry Birds or Clash of Clans or any of these other online games, many of them you don't play with other people. You're not really winning anything in terms of material possessions, but there's something fun and exciting about getting to the next level, the next accomplishment, the next achievement. And I know everybody here today is very serious business people. None of us play these games, right? I bet you if you're anything like me, you play this game every day. Your email inbox, right? Checking that unread message, finishing the to-dos on your to-do list, or the thing that always gets me is that one app notification that I have to open to clear it away, are all examples of variable rewards of the hunt, the search for mastery, consistency, competency, and control. So the point of the variable reward phase is to give people what they came for. We have to fundamentally scratch their itch, and yet leave a bit of mystery, a bit of uncertainty around what they might find the next time they engage with the product. And finally, the last step of the hook is the investment phase. The investment phase is where the user puts something into the product in anticipation of some kind of future benefit. It's not about immediate reward. That's what the action phase is for. The investment phase is some kind of future benefit. The point of the investment phase is to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook. And investments do this in two ways. The first way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook is by loading the next trigger, So for example, when you send someone a message on WhatsApp or Slack or any number of other messaging services, when you send someone that message, you are loading the next trigger by investing in the platform because you're likely to get a reply. And what's that reply? What's that meatball an example of? That's an example of a notification, an external trigger that prompts you through the hook once again. So the first way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass is by loading the next trigger to increase the likelihood of passing through the hook once again. Now remember, this is something that I, as the user, did. This is not some piece of spammy marketing or something that you sent me. It's something that I did to bring myself back. That's called loading the next trigger. The second way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass is by storing value. Now, storing value is a really big deal. Storing value is why I love working in the technology industry as opposed to physical goods, because everything made of atoms, as opposed to bits, loses value with wear and tear, right? These chairs, my clothing, everything in the physical world loses value with wear and tear. It depreciates. But think about this. Habit-forming products should appreciate with use. They should get better and better the more we engage with them. And they do this through this principle of stored value. For example, the more content you might upload to a service, right? So the more you're telling a company your preferences about a particular piece of content, the better the service becomes with use. The more data you give to a company. So for example, on Mint.com, the more data you give the personal finance software, the better it becomes. If you think about social networks, the more data about your preferences you give them, the better and better the service becomes based on that data. The more followers you might have, the better it becomes as a way to reach the user's audience. So if tomorrow Twitter were to say, hey, I'm really sorry, Twitter's no longer free. Okay, you're going to have to start paying for Twitter. Who's more likely to pay? Is it going to be someone with 10 followers or 10,000 followers? Of course, it's going to be the user with 10,000 followers because they've stored so much into the product in the form of their follower count. And finally, reputation. Reputation is a form of stored value that users can literally take to the bank. So on TaskRabbit or eBay or Airbnb, your reputation determines what you can charge for your goods and services. And how likely am I to leave one of these platforms after I've stored all this value into the platform? It's kind of hard to leave all of a sudden. Which brings me to this cold, hard fact that some of you are not going to like what I'm about to tell you. That you were told a lie when you first learned about product management. And that lie was that if you simply build the best product, that's enough. And I'm here to tell you that that just ain't true. That Silicon Valley and Silicon Alley graveyards are full of companies that had the best technology. It's not the best technology that wins. It's the company that captures the monopoly of the mind, the thing that we turn to first out of habit. That's the company that captures the market. It's through successive cycles, through these 4 steps of the hook, the trigger, the action, the reward, and the investment. This is how our preferences are shaped and our tastes are formed. So, fundamentally, the 5 questions you've got to be able to answer for yourself. If you're building the kind of product that requires a habit, you have got to be able to answer, number 1, what's the internal trigger that your product is addressing? What's the external trigger that gets users to take the key action? What's the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward? Is the reward fulfilling and yet leaves the user wanting more? And then finally, what's the bit of work done to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook? Now, before I take some questions, there's one more topic I'd like to address. And I know it's on a lot of your minds. Many of you are thinking to yourself, hey, is this kosher? Is this all right to do to people? You know, to use their hidden psychology to change their behavior, is that all right to do? And if you had that thought, I say bravo. I think that is the appropriate, humane response to hearing about the power of changing people's behaviors through the psychology of habits. Because let's face it, any time that we are changing people's behavior to meet our ends in mind, particularly if it's a commercial ends, that, my friends, is a form of manipulation. So we need to be very careful about how we apply these techniques, because these are the kind of products that people take to bed with them every night. It's the first thing we reach for in the morning before we even say hello to our loved ones. So we have to ask ourselves and look at ourselves in the mirror and ask ourselves, how do we use this responsibly? How do we help people live happier, healthier, more connected, more productive lives by using the power of habits for good? You know, the world has no shortage of problems to fix. There are so many things that we can do to improve people's lives by changing their fundamental habits. And to tell you, I want to tell you just one quick example of a company that I invested in and put my money where my mouth is when it comes to using these habits for good. There's a product called 7 Cups. I got a call a few years ago. I do these office hours every week where people sign up. You're welcome to sign up if I can be helpful after today, if we don't get time to talk. So a few years ago, a therapist by the name of Glenn Moriarty, he's a psychotherapist, called me up and said, look, I know that there are lots of people out there that don't get the therapy that they need because of all the things I just talked to you about, all the factors of ability, right? It's difficult, it's time-consuming, it's expensive, there's social stigma. But I know that there are people out there who don't get therapy despite needing it. And so here's my hook. He read my book, and he built his own hook, and here it is. The internal trigger is seeking connection. It's a veteran suffering from PTSD. It's a parent who has a child with a disability. It's just any one of us who's feeling down and needs someone to talk to. That's the internal trigger. The action is to simply open this app, and for no money, you're instantly connected with another human being who's ready to listen. The variable reward is rewards of the tribe. It's this other person who's ready to connect with you. And then finally, the investment, here's where it gets really good. Every time you use the service, you're taught how to be a trained listener yourself. And it turns out that people who use the service and go from being helped to helping others get better, not just a little bit better, they get dramatically better. In fact, a third-party study recently found that 7 Cups is as effective as traditional psychotherapy. This one habit-forming app touches over 800,000, does it over 800,000 sessions every week in 140 languages. Talk about the amazing power of using habits for good. And with that, I'm going to take liberties with the words of Gandhi and encourage you to build the change that you wish to see in the world. Thank you very much. Quick favor while I take some questions. Quick favor, if you could, can everybody hold up their phones for just a minute for me? Can you hold up your phones into the air? There's two reasons for this. One, I want to get a quick picture of this beautiful audience. Raise them up high, terrific. Beautiful, thank you. The second reason is that I've increased your ability. I've made it easier, because the phone's in your hand, to go to this URL to tell me what you thought of the presentation. I'm constantly tweaking it based on your feedback. Just go to opinion2.us. Note it's opinion2.us, not .com, opinion2.us. Hold your phone horizontally, just 5 questions there to big radio button questions. Let me know what you thought. As soon as you click submit on that survey, you'll be given a link to my SlideShare page where you can have all the slides you just saw. Feel free to share those with your colleagues. The presentation you want to look for is Hooked Model. There's a bunch of slides there, and so the presentation you want to look for is the one that says Hooked Model. And with that, I would love to take some questions.
Time for one.
There's some up here.
Thanks, Nir, for the talk. We are building a more transactional product, so I wanted to hear your thoughts about how we can approach to model behavioral insights to build a better transactional product, like mortgages.
Right.
We take once in a lifetime.
So
typically.
Okay, so this has to do with the number one reason why a product will not become a habit. Okay, lots of products don't become habits because the behavior does not occur with sufficient frequency. Remember I said that the definition of a hook is an experience that connects the user's problem to your product with enough frequency to form a habit. And that frequency criteria is about a week's time or less. The data shows us that very few products can change a consumer habit if the behavior does not occur within a week's time or less. Of course, the more frequent, the better. When we talk about how often we use products like Slack and Instagram and Facebook and all these products, how often we use them, right? These are intraday habits. The average user is checking their home screen 150 times a day. So high propensity to change habits with that kind of frequency. But what if you have a product that is just not used all that often? I was invited to give a talk in front of 700 real estate agents recently. And the woman who hired me to do the talk said, now we'd like to hear from a habit expert. Nir Eyal is going to tell us how to make home buying and selling into a habit. I walked upstairs. I walk on stage and I almost threw up. I was like, I'm so sorry. I think you booked the wrong speaker. You are never, ever going to make home buying and selling into a habit. It's the opposite of a habit. Remember, the definition of a habit is a behavior done with little or no conscious thought, right? And it has to occur with sufficient frequency. Home buying and selling is something that we tend to overthink, and it doesn't occur, maybe once every 5-10 years, if ever, for people. So you're never going to make it into a habit. So what do you do if you have this kind of product, right? First of all, not every business model needs to be habit forming, but every business that needs to be habit forming has to have a hook, okay? But there's still a lot you can take away from it. So there are 3 things that we can do if the product is not used with sufficient frequency to bolt on a habit or aspects of a habit-forming product. It's the 3 C's. The first C is content, okay? If you can create a content consumption habit, you can bolt that on to a product that isn't used all that often. And the case study here is taste. So Williams-Sonoma, you know what Williams-Sonoma, the cookware and cook-related products, they know that is not going to be something that you interact with every week. You're not going to buy a new pan every single week. It's just not going to happen. So they can't make that into a habit. So instead, they created this content consumption habit with this website called Taste. And they send out these recipes and interviews and all this content 2 or 3 times a day to create a habit around the consumption of content because they know, and this is the mantra I want you to write down in your office somewhere and put on your walls, monetization is a result of engagement, not the other way around. Especially in the e-commerce industry, we are so focused on getting people to check out, and we forget about how to get them to check in. So using this content habit is one strategy. The second C, so we talked about content, the second C is community, okay? If you can build a community habit around your product, that's another way to bolt on a habit. So for example, this is a long shot. Is anybody here by chance a member of the Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club? Any members? No? Maybe your grandma or grandpa might be. The Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club, talking about Christmas ornaments, right? 300,000 Americans are members of this club, okay? You can go, what is it, May? I guarantee you, if you go to a Hallmark store in the middle of May, June, July, August, middle of summer, you will see lines of people waiting for these Christmas ornaments. How do they do it? Well, it turns out that what they're really selling is not the Christmas ornaments, right? That's the definition of a product that's not bought often enough to form a habit. Turns out that people are coming because of the community. Did you know that if you sign up for a membership in the Hallmark Keepsake Ornament Club, you are offered the opportunity, this is amazing. You are offered the opportunity to come into the store and help them unpack the ornaments from the boxes. I know! To many of us, that seems like slave labor, but for people in this club, it's a big deal because Susie's going to be there and Billy's going to be there and my friends are going to be there. So what they're really selling is the opportunity to connect with another human being. That's the real product that forms a habit. The result of that engagement is eventual monetization. Now, finally, the third way to use some of these aspects is around commitment, the third C. Even if a product is not used all that often, if the user puts in a ton of commitment, kind of like the investment phase that I showed you earlier, if you put in a lot of effort into setting up the product the first time, even if you don't use it for a long, long time, you have this habit-forming aspect because it's not worth it for me to do it again somewhere else. A good example of this is a company I invested in several years ago, Eventbrite. So when you set up a page on Eventbrite, it's a lot of work to set it up, right? You have to set up your account, describe the event, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you might not do that same event for another year, but because you've set it up already, and it's so much effort to get off the platform and do it somewhere else, okay, I've already made the commitment. My data's already in there. I'll just use the product again. And this happened to us. We do an event every year called the Habit Summit, and we keep using Eventbrite year after year after year, even though there are cheaper options out there because we've already made the commitment. So content, community, and commitment. Those are the three potential options. Can we do one more question? No time? Okay, I'll be hanging around afterwards. Come find me. If I didn't get to answer your question, my website is nirandfar.com. I'd be happy to help you out if you go to the website as well. Thanks so much. Thank you.